The war had lasted for so long that most species in the galaxy had forgotten why it started in the first place. It was simply a constant, a grim reality, that every sentient being was born into the Galactic Confederation. A loose alliance of diverse and once hopeful civilizations had been locked in a brutal, unrelenting conflict with the hegemony of 12 suns for over 200 years, 2 full centuries of blood sacrifice, technological escalation, and strategic desperation. Entire generations were born, trained to fight, and died without ever knowing peace. The war was not merely a distant thing. Fought in some abstract sector of the stars, it had touched every planet, every moon, every family. The hegemony was a terrifying enemy, insectoid in appearance but fanatical in belief. They worshipped combat and revered death in battle as the highest honor. Their soldiers were engineered for war, both biologically and culturally. Their reproduction rate far exceeded that of the Confederation. Their faith assured them that dying while killing the enemy would bring them eternal glory, and so they charged endlessly, relentlessly. Wave after wave of carapaced warriors driven by hive mind coordination and religious zealotry, the Confederation, in contrast, was never built for war. It was an alliance formed around science, trade, diplomacy, exploration, and shared progress. Its member worlds prided themselves on cultural enlightenment and peaceful coexistence. They had fleets, yes, but mostly for exploration. Their ships were not designed for prolonged combat. Their military doctrine lacked the ruthlessness necessary to counter a foe. Like the hegemony, the early years of the war were disastrous. Confederation forces scrambled to retrofit civilian and research vessels with weaponry, sometimes resulting in catastrophic failures. Their engineers often warned that such modifications were unstable, but desperation silenced reason. More ships were lost to malfunction than to enemy fire in those first bloody decades. The hegemony showed no mercy. Colonies were razed, orbital habitats shattered, entire civilizations erased with precision and cruelty. Confederation High Command issued reassurances to the public, but the numbers spoke louder. 37 habitable worlds lost 16 stations the size of planetary moons, obliterated 18 billion lives, extinguished on the Confederation side alone. And those were only the confirmed numbers. The hegemony suffered even greater losses, but it did not slow them. Their faith demanded they fight until they ceased to exist, and so they welcomed death, while the Confederation feared it. No amount of diplomacy could bridge such a chasm. Negotiations failed spectacularly. Cultural exchange efforts ended with disemboweled ambassadors placed in specimen jars. Communication was impossible, with a species whose language included pheromones and ceremonial bloodletting. So the war dragged on, slowly mutating. As each side adapted, technologies were stolen, copied, and reimagined. Strategies evolved and counter-evolved. Entire military philosophies were born only to be discarded and replaced when they no longer yielded results. The Siege of Takti, the massacre at Deneby 6, the Rylan Gambit, these names became sacred and feared battlefields, synonymous with the cost of survival to the outside observer. The war was madness to those within it. It was life by the 50th year. Both sides had transitioned to automated warfare drone fleets, piloted by increasingly sophisticated artificial intelligences, clashed in the voids between stars by the 100th year. Those artificial minds began developing their own combat doctrines. Doctrines that often surpassed the understanding of their creators. One of the most memorable victories the Confederation ever claimed came during the Battle of the Many Expanse, where an admiral, desperate and out of options, authorized her battle AI to rewrite its core directives mid-engagement. What followed was a maneuver so unexpected that it obliterated the main armada of the hegemony at the cost of nearly half the Confederation fleet. The admiral was later executed for insubordination, but the temporary peace bought by her strategy lasted 30 years. It was the longest stretch of calm the war had ever known when the hegemony returned. They did so with an evolution, of their own cybernetic warriors, fused with machine and flesh, born solely to counter the Confederation. And the slaughter resumed worse than before. The war had become a self-replicating engine of escalation. Each victory sowed the seeds for a newer, deadlier retaliation. Both sides climbed the ladder of destruction, each rung soaked in blood and desperation. The Confederation knew the end was near. Their projections calculated a 98% chance of total collapse within 5 decades. Leadership across member worlds began whispering about one final chance, one sliver of hope, a small blue-green planet on the edge of a quiet arm in the galaxy Earth. They had monitored the species for centuries, ever since the first primitive radio signals escaped their atmosphere. They watched as humanity tore itself apart in world wars, then rapidly advanced in technology, science, and culture. Their obsession with violence and invention made them both terrifying and fascinating to the Confederation. Many leaders feared them, calling humans unpredictable, creative, and explosively dangerous. Their non-interference policy remained firm: no contact with faster than light species. But privately, many admitted that the real reason was fear. Fear of what humanity might become if provoked, or worse, if invited to the stars, and shown how the galaxy truly worked in the final years of the conflict. However, that fear began to twist into something else. Hope, maybe the very traits that made humanity so dangerous, could also make them the perfect weapon in a war the Confederation could no longer win. Maybe they could do what no other species had managed. Maybe they could survive. Maybe they could change the course of history. But none of them expected what really happened when humans finally joined the war. No one imagined they would do it in 5 hours. The first time the Confederation ever truly considered approaching humans was not out of curiosity or diplomacy, but sheer desperation. After 200 years of war and watching their civilizations buckle under the weight of attrition, the Confederation Council began revisiting every forbidden option, every what if, every last hope they had previously discarded for being too dangerous. And at the top of that list was Earth, a planet so volatile and unpredictable that even the most hawkish admirals had once insisted on avoiding contact at all costs. Humanity was a mystery to them, a contradiction wrapped in chaos. They had watched the species since the first whispers of electromagnetic waves escaped into space. They had seen the mushroom clouds, the genocides, the famines, the riots, and then they watched humanity crawl back from each disaster, stronger, faster, more determined, and terrifyingly more united. Their capacity to adapt was only rivaled by their capacity to destroy. And for that reason, the Confederation had kept its distance. Even as the war escalated and entire fleets were vaporized, even as allied species begged for reinforcements that never came, the humans were labeled too unstable, too creative in their violence, too different in the ways they thought and fought to be trusted. With knowledge of the wider galaxy, but the war changed, the war changed everything. And so, a decision was made in hushed tones. Behind the sealed doors of New Cambridge High Command, the Confederation would reach out to Earth, not for alliance, not yet, but for contact, for evaluation. The mission was assigned to Commander Nick Polarian, the most decorated xenodiplomat in Confederation history. With 16 peaceful first contacts under his belt, he was confident, even proud of his reputation, just another primitive species. He told the Council, needing a gentle introduction to the galactic community, he would not return with that confidence intact. The team chose Wyoming, a rural, low-density region of Earth, to avoid panic or mass exposure. Their ships, equipped with stealth technology, landed silently in the night beneath a moonless sky. They emerged with practiced calm, universal translators, activated gift bundles of medical technology prepared, and ceremonial speeches memorized. They were intercepted within minutes by local law enforcement officers responding to reports of strange lights without hesitation. 3 delegates were zip-tied, face down on the ground, weapons aimed at their most vulnerable nerve clusters. Polarian himself was restrained and interrogated by a woman who identified as a night shift dispatcher, but had apparently consumed vast amounts of cultural knowledge through a medium called television. More specifically, a series known as The X-Files. She asked detailed tactical questions about ship, composition propulsion methods, and signal encoding. When the extraction team arrived, they found the humans had already reverse-engineered pieces of Confederation translation devices and were experimenting with them in a garage Polarian. Later filed a report describing humans as simultaneously less advanced and more dangerous than anticipated. The council debated for days what to do next. Some argued for complete withdrawal. Others insisted that this level of threat creativity made humans ideal allies. The vote was narrow, but in the end, the Confederation chose to continue contact. This time officially, the next delegation reached out through formal diplomatic channels and was granted an audience with the United Nations. The response from Earth was calm, polite, and utterly infuriating. While we are sympathetic to your struggle, humanity is not prepared to join interstellar warfare. At this time, the statement was broadcast in multiple languages and carried an air of bureaucratic reasonableness. But behind the scenes, Confederation intelligence agents had intercepted enough data to see through the lie. Humanity had always been obsessed with aliens with space travel, with the idea of contact. The entertainment industry was flooded with stories of galactic empires, interstellar diplomacy, and alien invasions, some hopeful, many violent, but all indicating an intense and long-standing cultural fixation on the stars, and the unknown military think tanks across Earth had been modeling scenarios for extraterrestrial engagement for decades. Government archives were full of contingency plans for how to respond to the arrival of alien life. And still they said no. The real reason surfaced during a classified discussion among Earth's leaders. A recording of that meeting was leaked to the Confederation and played in stunned silence. If two galactic powers have been fighting to a stalemate for 200 years, then either they are both incompetent or unimaginably dangerous. Either way, we would be fools to join until we understand the full picture. It was a brutal calculation and a correct one. Confederation officials felt a mixture of offense and admiration. Humans had understood in mere days what took the Confederation nearly a century. To accept that this war was not winnable by traditional means, that the only way to survive was to break the rules and rewrite the game. Over the following years, the Confederation made 4 more attempts each time, met with the same diplomatic stalling, the same courteous refusals, cloaked in administrative language and protocol. The humans cited internal disputes, global instability, climate issues, technological limitations. Anything that sounded reasonable, but always the answer was no. And still, the Confederation watched, waited, and hoped. Because something about the humans lingered in their thoughts. They were too unpredictable to dismiss, too stubborn to forget. And despite their refusal, they kept learning, reverse engineering every scrap of technology. They could get their hands on simulating tactics and engagement models that no pre-FTL species should even understand. They were watching the war and studying it like a puzzle. And no one knew what would happen if the day came when they finally decided to take part in it. It began with 7 names that no one in the galaxy had heard before. Names that would never be forgotten after what came next. Elena Rodriguez, Malik Patterson, Jun Takahashi, and 4 others whose identities became etched into both human history and galactic legend. They were astronauts, scientists, explorers on a mission of discovery. Not war. Their destination was Deimos, a moon of Mars, part of humanity's growing presence in space, a testament to the dreams of a species still young by cosmic standards, but ambitious in their reach. The mission, known as Artemis, was routine by human standards. A landmark, yes, but peaceful. Symbolic, a sign that they were moving toward the stars on their own terms. They did not know that the stars were already at war, and that they were flying directly into the crossfire. The hegemony ship that detected them was a scout, small, fast, and programmed to eliminate any potential surveillance vessels before returning to its fleet. It operated understanding orders and protocols that had not been updated in decades, perhaps never adjusted to account for humans who were still considered pre-contact anomalies and not worth the risk of direct engagement. The scout ship did not attempt communication. It did not scan for identification. It did not hesitate. It opened fire, and the Artemis was gone. The 7 humans aboard were vaporized in an instant, their vessel reduced to scattered atoms floating in the void. Their final transmission cut off mid-sentence. The observatories on Earth caught the event in chilling detail, tracking the light flare and radiation spike that marked the end of the mission. The data was clear and indisputable. The Artemis had been attacked by an advanced energy weapon of non-human origin, a kill shot with no warning, no negotiation, no mercy. The Confederation received the report before the human governments could respond, and their council immediately descended into panic. This was the mistake. This was the event that would undo centuries of restraint and ignite the most unpredictable force in the galaxy, the humans themselves. And yet, nothing happened. Not at first. No public statements, no outrage, no military movement. The Confederation waited, held its breath, unsure if the humans had failed to grasp the significance or were choosing not to react for 3 days. The planet was quiet. Unsettlingly, so the streets bustled, the satellites orbited, the internet churned with speculation and conspiracy theories. But from the seats of human power, there was only silence. Then on the 4th day, a single message was transmitted across every frequency in the direction of the nearest known hegemony outpost. It was not a threat, not an ultimatum, not a declaration. It was 6 words. And nothing more. You have taken 7 of ours. We are coming. No one in the Confederation who heard that message doubted its meaning or the intent behind it. Within hours, Earth began to move not just politically, not just diplomatically, but physically, militarily, and with terrifying coordination. Global reserve forces were activated. Private corporations shifted overnight to wartime production lines. Civilian contractors with no prior military connection began reconfiguring their operations toward a single-purpose retaliation. Space launch facilities were booked around the clock, and orbital manufacturing platforms lit up like never before. The United Nations transmitted a new message to the Confederation. The previous alliance offer is now accepted. Please provide complete technical specifications of compatible weapon systems and the precise coordinates of hegemony command centers. Human forces will be ready to deploy in 72 hours. The Council was stunned. No species had ever mobilized that quickly after first contact, let alone a species with no prior history of space combat. The Confederation had taken 60 days to coordinate a defense after their own first strike by the hegemony. And even that was considered a record. Humans had responded to the destruction of a single unarmed research vessel by preparing a full-scale interstellar military campaign. In less than 3 days, the implications were staggering. The Confederation had always viewed humans as volatile, but this was something else entirely. This was resolve forged in silence. This was wrath without spectacle. It was the kind of retribution that came not from politics, but from principle, and that terrified them because it was unstoppable, unnegotiable, unrelenting, and it was only the beginning. 72 hours after the message Earth sent to the Confederation, the humans arrived at the rally point, and what appeared from the jump point was not what anyone expected. The Council had anticipated a few vessels, maybe a dozen ships cobbled together for vengeance, bold and brave perhaps, but ultimately doomed. Instead, the void split open and it poured over 3,000 ships of every imaginable size and shape. Some were clearly modified, civilian freighters repurposed with hull-mounted weapons. Others were sleek designs that fused human engineering with freshly shared Confederation schematics. The sheer diversity of construction defied categorization. Some vessels looked like fishing trawlers refitted for space. Others like modular platforms still bearing company logos, now emblazoned with military insignia and bristling with launch tubes and rotating turrets. It was a fleet born of improvisation, necessity, and fury. One admiral watched in stunned silence as a massive structure emerged from the jump point. Its asymmetrical design almost offensive to the Confederation's aesthetic standards. Is that a ship, he asked. Is that even spaceworthy? The answer came moments later, when the monstrosity activated its thrusters aligned with the fleet and began issuing orders. It was the command vessel, and on its screen appeared a human woman, short gray hair, jaw set, eyes sharp as razors. General Morgan, Way United Earth Defense Force. She said, without pleasantries, "We've reviewed your tactical data. Your current strategy is flawed." The room bristled with offense. Admiral Kex flushed in indignation, his color sacks turning deep purple. "You cannot possibly believe you can win a war. We've been fighting for centuries." She stared back at him. "Not to help you fight it, to win it." Her tone was final, and the transmission cut. The human fleet began forming up, but their patterns made no sense to Confederation observers. They were abandoning standard battle formations, placing their largest ships in front, exposing what should have been protected cores to the enemy line. It was madness. Tactical systems flagged the formation as suicidal. The probability of success hovered below 12%, yet the humans moved with confidence and purpose. Their formations were not errors. They were tactics that had never been seen before. They were doing things not because they were logical, but because they were unpredictable. It was chaos turned into advantage, and then another human vessel transmitted a separate request. A scientist named Dr. Oliver Chandra Seer asked for access to the Confederation's central computing network and all data regarding hegemony communication systems. Why ask the Confederation officers, "What could your team possibly achieve in hours that we haven't in decades?" He answered with a calm audacity that chilled the room. "General Way is the distraction, we're the solution." What followed inside the Confederation? Command Center was nothing short of a technological coup. Human scientists and engineers poured into the systems, ignoring protocols, bypassing security measures, violating every digital standard the Confederation held dear. Their hands flew across keyboards as they consumed alarming amounts of a bitter drink called coffee. They connected incompatible systems, rewrote code in real time, and implemented algorithms considered theoretical at best by Confederation. Academia, you can integrate those subsystems, they're fundamentally incompatible. Shouted the systems chief. A woman named Reena Patel did not even look up. "Just watch me," she said, and kept typing. Within the first hour, the human fleet engaged the forward line of hegemony defenses, and something incredible happened. They survived. The ships took hit after hit and kept moving. Their hulls disintegrated in sections, but none of the ships exploded. It was revealed later that they were not using shields in the traditional sense, but sacrificial armor layers designed to take one hit and fail. Each blow peeled away a piece of hull that had already been marked as expendable. Every design built to endure just enough, just once, and keep moving forward. At the same time, inside the Confederation Systems Readiness team found a pattern in the hegemony communication protocols, a weakness buried deep inside the structure of their quantum encryption. Something dismissed for years as statistical noise. It wasn't noise, it was a redundancy, and within minutes, they had cracked it. Rihanna announced to the command center, "We're in there not just watching us now, they're rewriting their systems and injecting code designed to interfere with the hive coordination of the hegemony fleet." Within that first hour, what had seemed like a chaotic mess became a symphony of disruption, precision, and purpose. And that was only the beginning. From the first moment the human fleet engaged the hegemony forward defenses, the Confederation tactical boards lit up with warnings, simulations, and frantic recalculations. According to every model prediction and historical precedent, the humans should have been obliterated. Their formations were loose, irregular, and dangerously exposed. Their largest ships, the command vessels and heavy carriers, were not protected at the center of their fleet like any sane military doctrine would dictate. Instead, they were out front, absorbing fire, drawing attention, absorbing punishment. The hegemony fleet responded in kind. Their crystal-based beam Weapons lanced through the void, slamming into human hulls with devastating precision, and yet the humans kept advancing. Their ships took damage. Whole sections of plating tore away, systems shut down, but not catastrophically. The ships did not explode. They kept moving, kept returning fire in chaotic arcs that had no discernible rhythm, no unified pattern. It was not war as the Confederation knew it. It was something else entirely. And then the second wave began. Smaller ships that had been idling behind the main formation suddenly accelerated in random directions. Some curved into spirals, others rocketed forward, then pulled hard to the left or right. They scattered like a swarm with no center, and the Confederation systems registered it as a collapse of coordination, a total systems failure. But it was not. It was deliberate confusion, engineered chaos designed to break the predictive algorithms of the hegemony battle computers. It worked. The hegemony ships paused, faltered, recalibrated. But too late. By the time their systems adapted, the human ships were already past the first line of defense, striking at the secondary defense net. And behind that action, something else was happening. In the Confederation Command Center, Dr. Chandra Seer and Reena Patel were executing the next stage of their digital assault. The virus, designed specifically to infect crystalline computing systems, was spreading through hegemony communication relays, injecting false data, corrupting command hierarchies, and subtly breaking down synchronization between ships. The Confederation had never seen anything like it. They had tried for years to decipher the crystalline language the hegemony systems used to talk to one another. But the humans had found the vulnerability, not through logic, but through pattern recognition born of decades of analyzing human-made chaos and learning to weaponize it. Their software bypassed firewalls and twisted the code in ways that confused the systems themselves. The hegemony ships began to drift out of formation, subtly at first, then more obviously. Formations that had moved with hive-like precision now twitched, shuddered, lost cohesion. Within the second hour, the humans had broken the first defensive line and were punching through the second. The hegemony attempted to respond. Their coordination faltered, but they still had numbers and power and fearsome weapon systems. The Confederation feared a counterattack, but the humans did not wait. They launched their next maneuver, a pattern so erratic it caused the Confederation tactical board to crash 3 times before stabilizing. It was a fight, 100 ships charging in, then scattering again, some appearing to retreat, only to loop around in impossible vectors. One admiral leaned in toward the display and muttered, "They're not fighting by our rules." And he was right. The humans were not interested in balance or exchange of fire. They were executing a war plan based entirely on asymmetry. Every ship was expendable. Every move was a bait, a distraction, or a test. They were probing the defenses faster than the hegemony could respond, identifying gaps and vulnerabilities in real time, and then striking those precise points with overwhelming force. Sometimes sacrificing 3 ships to disable 1 node, but always pressing forward as their ships tore through the second line of defense. Their virus finished taking root inside the hegemony command networks, and the full effect began to unfold. The crystal ships of the enemy began making critical errors, targeting systems, misfired engines, hesitated in response to commands, and some vessels simply lost connection to the hive-mind coordination that had made them so unstoppable. The humans had done the impossible. They had introduced entropy into a system designed around perfect order. They had infected not only the machines, but the doctrine itself, and all of it had been achieved in less than 2 hours of combat. The Confederation stood in disbelief, unsure whether to cheer or weep at the realization that after centuries of warfare, all it had taken was a species that did not believe in rules to break the stalemate by the 3rd hour of combat. The hegemony had pulled back to their final line of defense, a formation of dreadclaws, each one a city-sized warship bristling with planet-killing weaponry. They were the apex of the hegemony fleet, unmatched in firepower and durability. and until that day, no enemy force had ever reached them, let alone dared to engage them directly. Conventional wisdom demanded retreat. The Confederation officers watching the battle unfold were certain the human fleet would withdraw, regroup, or at the very least, delay for a new strategy. But that was not what happened. Instead, the remaining human ships accelerated straight into the mouth of destruction at speeds approaching relativistic thresholds. A stunned silence fell over the command room as the tactical displays lit up with collision warnings, vector anomalies, and ship loss predictions. "They've gone completely mad," someone whispered. But no, they had not gone mad. They had made a decision. The tactic later named the Kamikaze Gambit was executed without hesitation. Dozens of human ships slammed into the Dreadclaws, their hulls packed with dense cores rigged to detonate on impact. The results were catastrophic, even by war standards. Explosions ruptured space, tore through shielding, and created unstable gravitational pockets that pulled nearby ships into fragmentation zones. But then the full truth came out. Those were not drones. They were not automated. They were piloted by human beings, each one a volunteer, each one fully aware of what their mission meant. They had names, stories, families, and most of all, they had chosen this path. The Confederation was stunned. Such a level of sacrifice was beyond comprehension to most of their species. But to the humans, it was the price of stopping the war. These were not just soldiers. They were terminal patients, individuals given a final purpose by a program later revealed to be called the Last Strike Battalion. They had volunteered from hospital beds and care facilities, knowing their time was already counted, and they chose to spend it doing the one thing that could give others a chance to live with their sacrifice. Breaches opened in the Dreadclaw, formation weaknesses that no amount of shielding could cover. And through those openings, the main fleet surged ahead, bypassing the third defensive sphere entirely, and bringing the battle within striking distance of the Hegemony Command Nexus, the heart of enemy coordination and decision-making. While the ships pushed forward, the virus launched earlier by Rihanna Patel and her team continued its silent war. Now it had reached the navigation cores and the synchronization servers of the Hegemony fleet. Formations broke apart. Ships drifted out of alignment, firing patterns lost cohesion, and entire squadrons began to misidentify their own allies as threats. It was systemic collapse unfolding live across the battlefield, and the humans exploited every second of it. They turned confusion into opportunity and opportunity into leverage. They maneuvered with surgical precision through chaos they themselves had caused, using every lesson, every test, every simulation they had ever run. On battlefield entropy, the Hegemony tried to recover, but their command hierarchy was fragmenting from within, and with their greatest ships reduced to debris and their coordination shattered, the tide was no longer turning. It had turned decisively and irreversibly. The humans were not just fighting to win, they were fighting to end the war, and they were succeeding with the Hegemony, Dreadclaws destroyed or crippled, and their fleet coordination unraveling. The human ships pushed forward, forming into what their commanders referred to as a kill box. Around the Hegemony Command Nexus, a massive battle station, in orbit, around a dead star. It was the center of all strategic operations, the brain of the war machine, the place where the hierarchs issued orders and maintained control of their vast empire. The Confederation officers watching from their secure command centers expected the next move to be an orbital bombardment. It was the logical step, the conventional strategy, overwhelming force directed at the enemy core, but logic once again failed to predict the humans. Instead of bombarding the station, the human fleet launched thousands of small craft, barely larger than escape pods, hurtling toward the Nexus at speeds that made targeting them nearly impossible. The Confederation officers were baffled. What are they doing? Those pods contain troops. They're sending boarding parties against Hegemony warriors in close quarters. That was madness to anyone who had ever encountered the sheer ferocity of the enemy infantry. But the humans were not thinking in terms of battle. They were thinking in terms of systems disruption. The boarding pods did not carry soldiers. In the traditional sense, they carried devices. Electromagnetic pulse generators modified to interact with crystalline technology once aboard the boarding crews did not engage in firefights. They deployed their devices in key infrastructure zones, triggering pulses that knocked out entire wings of the station, rendering weapon systems inert, disconnecting communication nodes and disabling life support sectors without firing a shot at the same time. Dr. Chandra Seer's virus reached the core of the Nexus, a crystalline quantum server matrix that had never been breached not once in over a century of war. The virus embedded itself in the operating layers of the command system, feeding it false data, slowing its responses, rerouting its priorities, and finally initiating recursive overloads that forced it to shut down non-essential systems, which ironically included its own security protocols. The station began to shut itself down, section by section, floor by floor. Command decks darkened, targeting arrays went offline. Energy distribution grids failed. The hegemony commanders on board realized what was happening. Too late, their messages became frantic, then silent. Their backup servers initiated emergency purge protocols, but the humans had anticipated that too. The virus had blocked the data pathways, isolating each node from the next, locking them into a spiral of fragmentation that no internal system could recover from on the Confederation tactical display. It was like watching a beast go limp from the inside out. One moment the Nexus was coordinating every ship in the sector, and the next, it was a hollow shell-blind mute and vulnerable without direction. The remaining hegemony ships floundered. Their formations shattered, their weapons misfiring or silent, their maneuvering sluggish and panicked. It was in that moment when the humans struck the final blow. General Wei transmitted a single open-channel broadcast to the entire hegemony network. Her voice calm, steady cold. "This is General Morgan, Way of Earth. Your war is over. Your fleet is disabled. Your command structure is compromised. You have 1 hour to transmit your unconditional surrender on all channels, or we will be forced to demonstrate what happens when humans choose to fight without restraint." It was not a threat. It was a warning, and everyone who had watched the previous 4 hours knew that she meant it. The silence that followed was heavier than any weapon, and after 52 minutes, the hegemony surrendered. They did not attempt a last stand. They did not bargain. They sent a full and final capitulation. Across every known frequency, the war that had consumed the galaxy for 200 years ended not with a grand battle, but with a quiet message of defeat delivered by a species that had not even been part of the conflict. 1 month earlier, it was a victory no one understood. Not even the humans, because what they had accomplished was not just the destruction of a fleet or the seizure of a station. It was the dismantling of a doctrine, a rejection of the rules that had governed warfare for generations. The humans had not played the game. They had broken the board and rewritten the conditions for victory. And in doing so, they reminded the galaxy of a truth. It had forgotten that war is not about honor, or endurance, or tradition. It is about ending the threat by whatever means necessary. And when the humans moved, they did not pause. They did not hesitate. They did not ask permission. They ended it. It had been 3 standard years since the 5-hour war, the most decisive conflict in galactic history. A war that ended before most species even understood it, had begun the hegemony. Once the most feared military force in known space, had become a client state. Its warships dismantled its command structure, dissolved its once unbreakable doctrine, replaced with something else entirely. Rehabilitation. The Confederation expected executions, purges, retribution. Instead, the humans demanded nothing of the sort. There were no trials, no galactic tribunals, no ceremonial displays of victory. The former warlords of the hegemony were placed into programs that involved therapy, meditation, and even horticulture. Several now spent their days designing flower gardens or studying human psychology and calling it transformation. The Confederation was baffled by this mercy. They had prepared for a human empire, an unstoppable force that would carve territory from the ashes of its enemies. They anticipated demands for resource rights, for political dominance, for unrestricted access to technology. They expected to be ruled, but the humans made only two requests: full voting membership in the Confederation Council, and the construction of a memorial on the site where the Artemis crew had been killed. That was it. No empires, no spoils, no colonization, only remembrance and equality. The Confederation had granted both without hesitation, because how could they refuse the very species that had saved them? And yet the aftermath of the war brought with it something far more complex than gratitude. It brought uncertainty, admiration, and a quiet fear. Because while the humans had proven themselves allies, they had also proven something far more terrifying. They had shown what they were capable of when provoked, and the galaxy had not forgotten it. Cultural exchanges began to flourish. Humans were invited to share art, philosophy, science. Their influence spread rapidly across the dozens of worlds, and with it came a shift in how problems were solved. Confederation scientists found that human engineers could solve technical problems that had stumped galactic experts for decades, not through superior knowledge, but through unconventional thinking. Rihanna Patel and her team were given honorary positions on multiple scientific boards. Dr. Chandra Seer was later elected as an interspecies research chair overseeing technological ethics across coalition systems. But their real impact was not in science, it was in perception. Every political negotiation, every strategic planning session, every diplomatic council now had one thing in common: if humans were present, the tone changed, strategies were reconsidered, words chosen more carefully. Not out of hostility, but out of memory, because the galaxy remembered those 5 hours. They remembered the silence before the storm, the calm efficiency with which General Wei issued her ultimatum, the logic-defying brilliance of the kamikaze maneuver, the cold precision with which the virus dismantled the unbreakable core of the hegemony network. No one ever said it aloud, but the thought lingered in every room where a human advisor sat. What if they turned against us? The humans never acted on that fear. They remained cooperative, transparent, supportive, but they never denied what they had done, and they never apologized. They simply returned to their world, continued building, exploring, sharing, and watching the stars as if nothing extraordinary had happened. And perhaps for them, it hadn't. Perhaps ending a war in 5 hours was not a miracle, but a necessity, an act of justice, done with purpose and efficiency for the Confederation. The 5-hour war became a subject of study taught in military academies, analyzed in diplomatic circles, debated in philosophical texts, and always concluded with the same realization: humans do not fight for conquest, they fight to end the fight, and when they choose to act, they act with finality. The galaxy is more peaceful now, more stable than it has been in generations. But no one ever forgets the lesson the humans taught them. Not with speeches or banners or monuments, but with action, swift, calculated, and absolute. The Confederation has gained its strongest ally, and they are thankful for that. But they will always keep one eye on Earth, not because they expect betrayal, but because they know what humanity is capable of when the time comes to protect what they value. The legacy of the 5-hour war was not just measured in destroyed fleets or surrendered empires. It was measured in the silence that followed, in the way every council chamber, every negotiation room, and every war college lecture across the galaxy shifted its tone. Whenever the topic of humanity arose, it was measured in the looks exchanged between diplomats when a human walked in the door, in the way leaders adjusted their strategies, knowing now that there was a force among them that did not think in cycles or treaties or historical trends, but in conclusions, final decisive endings. The Confederation had once prided itself on its sophisticated tactics. Centuries of military tradition, informed by vast archives of interstellar warfare. They had formulas, doctrines, escalation ladders, proportional responses. The humans shattered all of that in 5 hours They had taken centuries of accumulated strategy and made it obsolete, not by refining it, but by discarding it entirely. They rewrote what war meant, not a contest of endurance, not a test of honor, not a balance of powers, but a problem to be solved permanently and with overwhelming certainty. And this idea, more than any ship or virus or weapon, was what shook the galaxy to its core. It was the realization that the humans had not won because they were stronger. They had won because they were willing to end the war completely, without regard for precedent, without hesitation or ritual or performance. They did not seek to prove themselves. They sought to eliminate the threat and then walk away. And it worked. The psychological effect on the rest of the galaxy was immediate and lasting. Allied species began revising their military doctrines, studying human decision trees, recruiting human strategists to train their own officers. Fear was not the word often used publicly, but it permeated every major institution, quietly, subtly. A respect forged not in admiration, but in survival, because everyone knew that if humanity ever turned its full attention to conquest or dominance, they would be unstoppable. Not because they had better weapons, but because they did not think like everyone else. The 5-hour war became the new standard, the case study by which all other military actions were judged and inevitably found lacking for the Confederation. It became both a point of relief and a source of existential tension. They had survived, they had won, but only because humanity had chosen to intervene. And that choice had not been motivated by profit or power. It had been personal, a response to the death of 7 explorers who had meant something to their people. The lesson was clear. Humans do not enter wars lightly, but when they do, they end them, and they end them on their terms, not with ceremonies or prolonged peace talks, but with an ultimatum and a plan and a cold efficiency that made even the most war-hardened species question what they had really learned about conflict over the centuries. The memory of General Way standing before the Confederation Council, eyes sharp, voice level, declaring that they were not there to help prolong a stalemate but to win, became a symbol. A moment replayed in countless documentaries and training simulations, not for inspiration, but for awareness of what it truly meant when humanity made a decision. The virus created by Dr. Chandra Seer and his team, now studied as a technological masterpiece, was not just code. It was the embodiment of human approach to warfare. Find the weakness, exploit. It reshaped the environment until the enemy cannot function, and then offer them a single chance to surrender before demonstrating what happens next. Rihanna Patel's team of hackers and engineers became legends not just for their technical brilliance, but for their audacity. Their willingness to rewrite systems in real time, under fire, guided by instinct and caffeine, and a refusal to accept that anything was truly unbreakable. Even the human soldiers who sacrificed themselves in the Last Strike Battalion became symbols of a kind of courage that transcended species. Their names engraved not only on Earth, but on memorials across the Confederation, remembered as individuals who made the ultimate choice, not because they were ordered to, but because they believed it would end the bloodshed for everyone. And perhaps that was the most unsettling truth of all. Humanity had not fought to conquer or to retaliate. They had fought to protect, to resolve, to close a chapter that the galaxy itself had been unwilling or unable to finish for 200 years, and they had done it not with fanfare but with quiet, ruthless effectiveness. The 5-hour war was not just a victory. It was a mirror held up to every civilization that had played by the old rules and found them wanting, and in that mirror, the galaxy saw something it could not unsee. That peace is not the absence of war. It is the presence of those willing to end it, no matter the cost. In the 3 years since the 5-hour war, the galaxy had begun to change. The violence that had once defined entire star systems gave way to something quieter, more deliberate, more cautious, and at the center of this shift was Earth. Not because it imposed its will or expanded its borders, but because of what it had proven, because of what everyone now knew in their bones, even if they never spoke it aloud. the humans had become something like a myth. Not a legend of greatness or benevolence, but of potential for overwhelming calculated finality. They had walked into a conflict that had lasted 2 centuries and ended it in less time than a standard workday without superweapons, without ancient artifacts, without divine intervention. They had simply looked at the war and treated it like a problem that needed a solution. Then they solved it ruthlessly, cleanly, and completely. And the galaxy had never been able to forget it. Diplomatic summits began to include humans in every major discussion, not because anyone feared an uprising or an agenda, but because ignoring them now seemed like the most dangerous decision of all. Their opinions were sought, their advice requested, and their silence became the one thing no one wanted to hear. Because if a human advisor said nothing, everyone began to wonder what they were thinking, what they might be planning in a room full of species that had spent generations mastering the art of indirect speech and endless negotiation. Humans remained direct, precise, and unnervingly quiet. They rarely raised their voices, but when they spoke, people listened because they knew what it meant when a human finally chose to act. And so the galaxy adjusted, policies shifted, military doctrines were rewritten. Education systems began including human history as a mandatory subject. Even planets that had never been directly involved in the war began reviewing their defense protocols through the lens of what might happen if Earth ever stopped being an ally. And it was not because the humans had done anything threatening since the war. In fact, their behavior post-conflict had been the model of restraint. They shared technology. They assisted in rebuilding efforts. They turned down offers of conquest and power. Their fleet, which had once terrified entire battle-hardened species, now orbited in formation for ceremonial displays and training missions, never for show of force, but still the weight of what they had done remained in the air. A presence that could not be ignored, a reminder that underneath the calm exterior was a species that had rewritten the rules of war in less time than it took some species to schedule a committee meeting. And this presence was not just felt in politics or military circles. It echoed into culture, into religion, even into art. Poets wrote of the silence before Earth moved. Philosophers debated the ethics of decisive violence. Children reenacted the 5-hour war in play programs where General Wei and Dr. Chandra Seer became iconic figures. Part hero, part warning, and across all of this, there was an unspoken truth. The galaxy had been saved. Yes, but not by virtue or peace or slow diplomacy. It had been saved by a brutal efficiency, born of a species that had spent its short, chaotic history learning how to survive itself, and in doing so had become something the stars had never seen. A civilization that did not fear war, but despised its duration. A people who did not glorify the battlefield, but treated it like a task to be completed, a necessary horror that must not be prolonged, and perhaps most importantly, a force that asked for nothing in return. No empire, no tribute, no dominion, only a seat at the table and a place to mourn their dead. That restraint did more to unsettle the old powers than any demonstration of strength, because it meant the humans had nothing to prove. And when a species has nothing to prove, it cannot be manipulated, baited, or distracted. It simply acts when it decides to. And that was the fear, not the kind that triggers alarms and emergency protocols, but the kind that lingers in the back of every strategic mind, the kind that makes admirals double-check their calculations, the kind that makes leaders rehearse every word of their treaties, knowing that somewhere on the other side of the table, a human is listening, watching, evaluating, and remembering, because the humans remember everything, every insult, every loss, every moment of pain, and they do not forget, not because they are vengeful, but because they believe in closure, in resolution, in not leaving things unfinished. And so the galaxy moved forward cautiously, hopefully, but always, with one eye on Earth, not out of distrust, but out of awareness, because they had learned the lesson of the 5-hour war, and they would never forget it.